It was the one thing his money and his power couldn't buy, a genetic match to save his life. And it belonged to the one person his entire organization was trained to never see. With just weeks to live, a dying crime boss's last hope rested in the bone marrow of the black office cleaner his men passed in the hallway every night without a glance. This is the story of two people who existed in the same building but in entirely different universes. Choi Min-jun, the ruthless head of a Seoul syndicate, was dying of aplastic anemia, and Amani Akoy, a Nigerian migrant working nights to support her family back home, held the only key to his survival in her DNA. His empire was built on control. Her life was built on survival. Now his most loyal soldiers had one impossible order: protect the woman they were trained to never see, because if she walked away, their entire world died with him. In the world above, Choi Min-jun was a king. His empire, built on import licenses and construction monopolies, operated from the top 15 floors of the Gangnam Tower Amani cleaned each night. His diagnosis came in the spring: aplastic anemia. His own immune system was destroying his bone marrow, ceasing production of the blood cells he needed to live. For a man who commanded loyalty through sheer physical presence, the weakness was a betrayal. His first move was private clinics in Japan, then discreet trips to Singapore. The verdict was unanimous: without a transplant, he had perhaps 8 months. His organization began the search, family first. He was an only child, parents deceased. A cousin was tested, not a match. The net widened. Every member of his inner circle, then their extended families. Over 200 people were swabbed in back rooms of restaurants and karaoke bars. Each result came back negative. The odds, as his doctor quietly explained, were always stacked against him. For a Korean patient, the likelihood of finding a perfect genetic match from an unrelated donor within their own registry was already less than 50%. Going global only slightly improved those numbers. Genetics are stubborn. The markers needed for a successful transplant, the human leukocyte antigens, are inherited. You typically find them in your own ethnic backyard. Meanwhile, 23 floors below, Amani Akoy's shift began at 10 p.m. She arrived through the underground service entrance, changed into her blue uniform in a locker room shared with other migrant workers, and collected her cart. Her world was one of fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant. She supported 2 younger sisters through university in Lagos and sent money home to her mother. Her visa was tied to her contract with the cleaning service. To slip up meant deportation. So she moved through the offices silently, a ghost in the machinery of Korean commerce. She knew the patterns of the day staff by the mess they left. The finance team worked late and left coffee cups everywhere. The executives on the top floors were the cleanest, leaving almost no trace they were there at all. Min-jun's condition worsened by June. He required weekly blood transfusions. The rumor of his illness, which he'd fought to contain, began to seep out. In his world, weakness was an invitation. A lieutenant named Yi-ho, who handled his logistics, started making longer phone calls in the hallway. A payment to a city official was delayed. The architecture of control began to develop hairline fractures. His most trusted advisor, an older man named Mr. Park who had served his father, presented the only viable option. "We must enter you into the international registry, the Be the Match network. It is anonymous. It is your best chance." Min-jun resisted. It meant exposing his need, his vulnerability to a foreign database. It meant waiting passively for a stranger. But the transfusions were becoming less effective. He relented. His genetic data was uploaded under a coded identifier. The global search began. And in a sterile lab halfway across the world, an algorithm began its work, comparing his HLA markers against millions of potential donors. Amani's story had begun 2 years earlier in a community health drive in Itaewon. A church group was encouraging minority residents to join the Korean marrow donor registry. The need for diversity was critical, they explained. She'd given a cheek swab, received a thank you card, and thought nothing more of it. It was a minor act of kindness in a new country, a way to feel connected. Her data entered the same international system, a single profile among millions. The call came to Amani on a Tuesday morning in August. She was sleeping after her night shift. The voice on the phone was polite, official. She was a preliminary match for a patient in need. Would she consent to further testing? Still half asleep, thinking it was a telemarketer, she almost said no. But the word patient caught her. She agreed. The next day, a kit arrived. More swabs. She sent it back. In Minjun's penthouse, Mr. Park took a call. He listened, said nothing, and hung up. He walked into Minjun's study where the boss was receiving an IV drip. They've found a match, a preliminary one. The match strength is high, 9 out of 10 alleles. A flicker in Minjun's eyes, the first hope in months. Who, where? The donor is coded. The registry protocol protects their identity until they formally agree. All we know is that they are listed in the Korean regional database. A domestic match. It seemed like a miracle. Plans were set in motion. Funds were allocated to expedite the process. The donor would be contacted, brought in for confirmatory blood draws, and if all held, the transplant would be scheduled within weeks. The mood in the organization shifted. The king might live. The fissures of power began to reseal. Then the second call came to Amani. The voice was more urgent this time. The match was not just preliminary, it was remarkably close. Could she come to Seoul National University Hospital for a full blood workup? Her commitment wavered. She researched the donation process. It involved injections for 5 days, then a procedure to filter stem cells from her blood. It would mean taking time off work. It would mean questions from her employer. The cleaning service was not known for its compassion. But she thought of a patient, a stranger waiting. She thought of her mother's teachings about duty. She agreed. The hospital visit was surreal. She was treated with a level of respect she'd never experienced in Korea. Nurses were exceedingly polite. Doctors explained the process in careful detail. She gave vials of blood. As she left, a coordinator mentioned, almost offhandedly, "You are a very rare match. This is quite special." The final results landed on Mr. Park's desk 48 hours later. He opened the file, expecting to see a name, an address, a plan to discreetly compensate a grateful citizen. His eyes scanned the page, donor number, match confirmation, and then the donor information section. Nationality, Nigerian. Occupation, office cleaner. Employer, Seoul Metro Cleaners Co-work location, Gangnam Tower. He read it 3 times. The air left the room. Gangnam Tower, their building. The woman who emptied their trash cans and mopped their hallways. The invisible workforce. The one demographic his organization and his boss had never factored into any calculation. The genetic miracle they had been praying for was, at this very moment, probably vacuuming the lobby. He had to tell Minjun. He walked to the penthouse, the paper feeling like lead in his hand. He found Minjun by the window, looking out over the city he commanded. "We have the donor profile," Mr. Park said, his voice uncharacteristically thin. "It is confirmed, but the situation, it is not what we expected." Minjun turned, impatient. "Just tell me, who do we need to pay?" Mr. Park placed the file on the table between them. "It is not a matter of payment. It is a matter of protection. The match, it is the foreign cleaner, the black woman who works nights in our own building." Silence filled the penthouse, broken only by the hum of the medical equipment. Minjun's face, pale from illness, showed no expression at first. Then, a slow, disbelieving shake of his head. The absurdity of it. The utter inversion of every natural order in his universe. His life now depended on the compliance of a person whose existence his world was designed to overlook. He looked at Mr. Park, and for the first time, his advisor saw not calculated rage, but genuine, profound confusion. "She works for us. Not for us directly, for the cleaning service we contract." "Does she know who the recipient is?" "No, the registry keeps it anonymous. She only knows she's matched with someone." Minjun stared out the window again at the city lights beginning to flicker on in the early evening. His kingdom, his legacy, All of it now hinged on a woman who had every reason to walk away. If she said no, he died. If she found out who he was, what his men did, she would almost certainly say no. The only way forward was to control the situation completely, to become her unseen guardian. He spoke without turning around, his voice a low command. Then we make sure she never finds out. And we make sure nothing and no one interferes with her saying yes. Assign a detail. Her safety is now the only priority of this organization. Do you understand? From this moment, her life is more important than mine. The first thing Amani noticed was the new nighttime security guard. He was too well dressed for the job, and his eyes never left her as she moved her cart from the server room to the executive suites. She shrugged it off as corporate paranoia. The second thing was the phone call from her supervisor. Her tone was unnervingly sweet. Amani, the company is so proud of your civic contribution. We are approving paid leave for your medical procedure. Full pay. No need to use your vacation days. Amani hadn't even submitted the request yet. She hung up, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Something was wrong. In the penthouse, Min Jun's protection order had activated a hidden machinery. Two of his most discreet men, former special forces, were now on a rotating watch. Their instructions were absolute: ensure the donor's safety and her continued willingness. They were not to interact. They were to eliminate any external threat before it even perceived her. They called her the asset. Mr. Park handled the institutional pressure. A generous donation was made to the cleaning company's owner. Amani's supervisor received a promotion and a warning: ask no questions. The hospital coordinator was reminded of patient confidentiality laws with a palpable intensity. For Amani, the world began to warp in small, inexplicable ways. An aggressive drunk who stumbled toward her on the subway platform was suddenly intercepted by two men in dark coats who led him quietly away. Her landlord, who had been threatening to raise her rent, called to apologize and froze it for another year. When she went for her final pre-donation physical, a private car was waiting outside her building. The driver said it was a hospital courtesy. She rode in silence, watching the city pass, feeling like she was in a bubble moving through Seoul, detached from all its normal rules. The internal strain within Min Jun's organization, however, was immediate and dangerous. The lieutenant, Yi-ho, saw not a medical necessity but a catastrophic vulnerability. His boss was surrendering operational focus and resources to protect a migrant worker. It made them look weak. It distracted from business. In a private meeting, he challenged Mr. Park. "We are soldiers, not nannies for a cleaning lady. This is an embarrassment." Mr. Park, who had known Yi-ho since he was a reckless enforcer, spoke softly. "That cleaning lady's blood is the only thing standing between the boss and a coffin. You mistake the nature of the mission. This is not protection. This is the most important extraction operation this family has ever run. The asset is the future itself." Yi-ho left the meeting unconvinced. His ambition, once a slow burn, was now fanned by the perceived instability. He began his own calculations. Amani received the schedule. The donation was set for 3 weeks' time. She would need 5 days of injections with a drug called filgrastim to stimulate her stem cell production, followed by the collection day. The hospital provided pamphlets. The potential side effects were flu-like symptoms: bone pain, fatigue. She read them in her small studio, the silence feeling heavier than usual. She called her mother in Lagos. "I am going to help someone. A medical procedure." Her mother, a nurse, was immediately concerned. "Do you know who? Is it safe?" Amani heard the fear in her voice. "It is safe. They do not tell you who. It is anonymous." It was the first time she had lied to her mother. The injections began. A nurse came to her apartment each morning to administer them. The nurse was professional, kind, and never made small talk. By the second day, a deep ache settled into Amani's hips and lower back, as promised. It was a constant, grinding pain that made it hard to sit still. She tried to clean her apartment to distract herself, but the pain was a relentless reminder of the profound biological process happening inside her, a process tied to a complete stranger. It was during this week of pain that she noticed the second car. It was a black sedan, different from the first. It parked across from her building every evening. She saw a man sitting in the driver's seat, watching her window, not with menace but with a professional, vacant focus. Fear, sharp and clear, cut through the medicinal haze. She was not being helped. She was being guarded. And if she needed this level of guarding, the person she was helping was not just any patient. She confronted the nurse the next morning. Who is paying for this? The private car, the home visits. The hospital does not do this. The nurse avoided her eyes, focusing on the alcohol swab. It is a special donor program, very generous. A program funded by who? Amani pressed. The recipient's family, I assume. They are very grateful. The needle went in. The conversation was over. That night the bone pain was worse. It felt like a betrayal. Her own body was being weaponized for a secret. Lying awake, she made a decision. The anonymous recipient had a family with resources, with power, with the ability to turn her life into a silent, padded cell. She needed to know who they were. She needed to look them in the eye, even if only in her mind. The next day she went to the public library. She used a computer terminal in the corner. She searched the Korean Marrow Registry for news, for stories of desperate searches. She found heartwarming articles about children saved by strangers. Nothing matched her timeline. Then, almost as an afterthought, she typed in aplastic anemia and soul and businessman. The third result was a small article from a financial blog, 6 weeks old. It speculated on the prolonged absence of Choi Min-jun, a reclusive figure in the import sector, from several high-level industry meetings. The comments section, a graveyard of internet gossip, had a single, unverified post. My cousin is a nurse at SNU. She said he's in for blood disease, getting transfusions. Choi Min-jun. She knew that name, not from the news, from her work. His company's logo was on the directory in the lobby of her building. His offices occupied the top floors, the floors that were always immaculate, that smelled of expensive air freshener and quiet power. The man in the penthouse. The crime lord whispers she'd overheard from other cleaners. The pieces crashed together with the force of a physical blow. The private cars, the guards, the silent supervisor, the hospital's strange deference. She wasn't saving a grateful family. She was saving a kingpin, and his kingdom was now her keeper. Panic, cold and slick, rose in her throat. She deleted her browser history, hands trembling. She walked out of the library into the bright afternoon, feeling more exposed than ever. Every person on the street was a potential sentry for Choi Min-jun. She had the proof, a fragile thread of circumstantial evidence, but it felt like a concrete truth. The moral calculus shattered. Her act of charity was now an act of perpetuating something dark. What did his survival mean for the city? For the people his organization might hurt. But intertwined with the revulsion was a new, more personal terror. If she was this valuable to them now, what happened after the donation? When her unique utility was gone, people who could orchestrate this level of control did not leave loose ends. Would they pay her off and send her home? Or would the silence need to be more permanent? She didn't go home. She walked aimlessly, eventually finding herself on a bench by the Han River. She watched the water, the cruise boats, the couples cycling by. A normal world she was no longer part of. She had two paths. She could run. She could go to the immigration office, to the police, tell them she was being coerced. But what would she say? A powerful man is kindly providing me security and paid leave so I can save his life. She had no evidence of a threat, only of overwhelming, suffocating care. And her visa was tied to her job, a job now being manipulated by that same man. Or she could go through with it, save a bad man's life, take the unknown consequence. The pain in her bones, a direct result of the injections meant for him, seemed to vote for the latter. There was no undoing what had already been set in motion inside her. She returned to her apartment as dusk fell. The black sedan was there. She stopped on the sidewalk, looked directly at the driver's window. She couldn't see his face through the tint, but she knew he saw her. She didn't look away. It was a small, futile act of defiance. Then she went inside. The following evening, the doorbell rang. It was not the nurse. It was Mr. Park. He stood alone in the hallway holding a small, elegant gift box. He looked like a grandfather, not a consigliere. "Ms. Akoy, may I speak with you for a moment?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the confrontation. She nodded, too afraid to speak, and let him in. He stepped into her modest studio, his eyes taking in the space without judgment. He placed the gift box on her small table. "This is from the family, a token of thanks. No obligation." Amani found her voice thin but steady. "Which family, Mr. Park?" He met her gaze. He understood the question. The pretense was over. "The family whose son you are giving a future to." "I know who he is," she said, the words hanging in the air. Mr. Park was silent for a long moment. He then gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I thought you might have discovered it. You are a smart woman. It changes nothing about the medical procedure, but it changes everything about why we are here." "To make sure I don't back out," she stated. "To make sure you are not harmed by those who would want you to back out," he corrected gently. "My employer's world is competitive. His illness has created instability. There are those within his circle and outside of it who would see his death as an opportunity. Your safety is paramount because your donation is the only path to stability." He was admitting it all, cloaked in a language of concern. Amani felt a surge of anger. "So I am a political tool." "You are a lifeline," Mr. Park said. "And in our world, that makes you the most important person in the city. The men outside, the car, the paid leave, these are not threats. They are shields. After the procedure, you will be compensated beyond your imagination. You can go home to Nigeria a wealthy woman, or you can stay in Korea with a new life. That is the promise." "And if I don't believe your promise?" Amani asked, crossing her arms over her chest, a barrier against the cold logic he presented. Mr. Park's expression softened, not into a smile, but into something like pity. "Then you believe the alternative, and living in fear of that alternative will not make you safer. It will only make the next 3 weeks unbearable. The choice to donate was always yours. It still is. But the choice to be unprotected in a dangerous situation is no longer on the table." He gave a slight bow, turned, and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Amani stood frozen, staring at the gift box. She didn't open it. The conversation was not a reassurance. It was a delineation of her prison walls. She had graduated from an asset to a conscious participant. And Mr. Park's final words echoed ominously. The instability he mentioned had a face. Yi-Ho. Yi-Ho was already moving. He saw Amani's realization not as a problem, but as the key. A scared donor could easily become an unwilling donor. He didn't need to hurt her directly. That would bring Minjun's full wrath down on him. He just needed to make her too terrified to go through with it. His plan was elegant in its cruelty. He would expose the truth not to her, but to the one element Minjun could not control, the public. A web blogger known for sensational crime gossip received an anonymous tip. It included Amani's name, her photo from her cleaning company ID, and her donor identification number. It claimed she was being forced and coerced by a criminal syndicate to donate bone marrow to its dying leader. The tip stopped short of naming Minjun directly, using descriptors any Seoul insider would recognize. The blogger, smelling the story of a lifetime, prepared to publish. The headline was drafted: "Migrant Worker Donor or Hostage in Underworld Medical Drama." The firewall around Amani was about to be breached from an unexpected direction, not by violence, but by the glare of a spotlight that would make her impossible to protect quietly. And in the resulting chaos, Yi-Ho believed the donation would collapse, Minjun would die, and the throne would be empty. The blog post went live at 8 a.m. on a Thursday. By 9, it was the top trending topic on Korean social media. The story had everything: crime, medicine, and a powerless migrant woman at the center. Amani's name and photo were everywhere. The narrative framed her as a hostage, a victim of monstrous coercion. Comments exploded. "How can this happen in our country? This is modern-day slavery. Free that woman." The public outrage was immediate, righteous, and dangerously misinformed. In her apartment, Amani's phone began to vibrate, then ring incessantly. Unknown numbers, local news outlets, international press. She turned it off, her hands shaking. She turned on the small TV. Her face was on the news channel. A reporter stood outside her building, the black sedan conspicuously absent. The guards had melted away the moment the story broke. She felt a new kind of exposure, one 1,000 times worse than being watched. She was now being consumed. At the hospital, the transplant coordinator was in crisis mode. The ethics board convened an emergency meeting. Their protocol was clear. If there was any credible evidence of coercion, the donation had to be suspended. They tried to call Amani. No answer. They called the registry. The pressure was immense. In the penthouse, Min-jun watched the news report, his face a mask of cold fury. The weak, pale man was gone for a moment, replaced by the calculating predator. This was an attack not on Amani but on him. It was designed to sever his lifeline by painting it as a crime. "Find the leak," he said to Mr. Park, his voice quiet, "and contain the narrative." Mr. Park was already 3 steps ahead. Containing a social media wildfire was impossible. The only move was to redirect it. He made 2 calls. The first was to the hospital's head of administration, reminding him of the substantial and completely legal charitable donations the Choi Family Foundation made to their pediatric wing. The second was to a powerful friend at a major television network. By noon, a counter-narrative began to form. A respected medical ethicist gave an interview. The donor registry is built on anonymity and voluntary consent. To assume coercion because of the recipient's background is to undermine the entire system and insult the donor's agency. It was a clever pivot, framing the outrage as elitist and prejudiced. Meanwhile, Yi-ho watched his plan unravel. The public sympathy had swung toward Amani, but not in the way he'd hoped. They saw a victim, not a defiant refuser. He needed to push harder. He needed to prove the coercion was real and imminent. He decided to stage a threat, not against Amani directly, that was too traceable, but against the process itself. If the hospital felt physically unsafe, they would postpone. Amani, trapped in her apartment with the curtains drawn, faced a tidal wave of noise. But in the eye of the storm, her own resolve crystallized. The public saw a helpless hostage. The syndicate saw a vital asset, but neither saw asterisk or asterisk. Her choice had been stripped from her twice over, first by the silent guardians, now by the screaming crowd. The only way to reclaim any shred of autonomy was to make the decision herself, openly, with full knowledge of the consequences. She turned her phone back on, ignored the dozens of notifications, and called the hospital transplant coordinator. "This is Amani Akoy," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am calling to confirm my consent for the donation procedure. It is my choice. I am not being coerced." There was a long pause on the other end. "Ms. Akoy, given the circumstances, the ethics board may require a formal, in-person interview." "I will do whatever is required," Amani said, "but I am donating." She hung up. The act felt like the first true breath she'd taken in weeks. She was not a tool. She was not a victim. She was a woman making a brutal, complicated choice to save a life, even if it was a flawed one. Her grandmother's voice came back to her, not about strong hands, but about clear eyes. "See the world as it is, child, not as you wish it to be. Then act." Mr. Park received word of her call within minutes. He relayed it to Min-jun. The boss was silent for a long time. "She is braver than my entire inner circle," he finally said. It was the highest praise he could give. But Yi-ho's next move was already in motion. That evening, as the head transplant nurse was leaving the hospital, a car pulled up beside her. A window rolled down. A man's voice, calm and direct, said, "Cancel the Choi procedure. It's not worth your career." Then the car sped off. It was a vague threat, but enough to terrify a civilian. The nurse reported it to hospital security and called the coordinator in a panic. The hospital's resolve, already shaky, crumbled. They announced a temporary postponement of all non-urgent donor procedures for a security review. The public saw it as validation of the coercion story. The blogosphere exploded again. See, they're threatening the hospital now. This was the crisis point. The donation was now in true jeopardy, not from Amani's refusal but from institutional risk aversion. Minjun's time was running out. His next transfusion was scheduled for 2 days later. Each one was becoming less effective. Mr. Park realized that playing defense was losing the game. They needed to go on the offensive, and they needed to do it in a way that was utterly, publicly legitimate. He presented the plan to Minjun. It was audacious. It involved surrendering control to the very forces arrayed against them. "We invite the scrutiny," Mr. Park said. "We request publicly that the National Police Agency's VIP Protection Unit provide security for the donor and the medical staff. We submit to their oversight. We make the entire process transparent to a government authority." Minjun stared at him. "You want to bring the police into my house? I want to bring them onto our side of the wall. If the police are guarding her, then no one can claim we are. It legitimizes everything. It makes Yiho's threats into crimes against the state, not just against us." It was a masterstroke. Minjun saw it immediately. It would expose his world to unprecedented light, but it would also protect the one thing that mattered more than his secrecy, his survival. He gave a single, tired nod. "Do it." The press release went out from Choi's corporate office, not his clandestine network. It expressed deep concern for the donor's safety and the integrity of the medical process in light of recent threats. It formally requested police protection for all parties involved, offering full cooperation. It was the language of a responsible, if besieged, businessman. The effect was seismic. The media narrative splintered. Was Choi Min-jun a ruthless crime lord or a desperate patient trying to do the right thing under impossible circumstances? The police, after intense internal debate, accepted the request. It was an unprecedented move, but the public pressure left them little choice. A police detail, separate from Min-jun's men, was assigned to Amani and the hospital team. Yiho watched, stunned, as his maneuver was not just neutralized but weaponized against him. His anonymous threat had handed his boss the perfect tool to sanitize the entire operation. He was now trapped. Any further action would be directly against the police. For Amani, the arrival of 2 uniformed police officers at her door was the final layer of surrealism. They were polite, professional, and utterly opaque. They would escort her to and from the hospital. They would secure the clinic floor. She was now in the protective custody of the state for a procedure to save an alleged criminal. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. The final predonation day arrived. Amani was taken to the hospital for her last round of injections and final blood tests. The police car followed the hospital car. News vans followed the police car. It was a circus. Inside the clinic, shielded from the cameras, she met with the ethics board. They asked her pointed, difficult questions for over an hour. She answered them all with the same quiet certainty. "It is my choice. I understand who the recipient is. I am doing this because I choose to." Her consent was formally documented and witnessed. The path was clear. The transplant was rescheduled for the following morning. That night in his penthouse, Min-jun received the final piece of Mr. Park's investigation. The digital trail from the blogger led back to a cutout, then to another, and finally to a payment routed through a shell company owned by Yiho's mistress. The evidence was conclusive. The betrayal was absolute. Min-jun summoned Yiho. The lieutenant arrived trying to project confidence. The boss was alone, sitting by the window connected to an IV stand. He didn't turn around. "The donation is tomorrow," Min-jun said. "A wise decision, boss. The police involvement is unconventional but smart." Min-jun finally turned. His eyes were like chips of flint. "I know it was you, Yiho, the leak, the threat to the nurse." Yiho's face went blank, then rearranged itself into confusion. "Boss, I don't." "Save it," Minjun interrupted, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You bet against my survival. You tried to kill me by killing my chance. In our world, that is the only sin." The room was silent. Yi-ho understood his fate was sealed. He gave a slight, resigned nod. "What will you do?" Minjun looked out at the city again. "Nothing, tonight. If the procedure tomorrow is successful, you will be exiled. You will leave Korea and never return. If it fails..." Minjun let the sentence hang. The implication was clear. If Minjun died, Yi-ho would not live to claim his prize. Mr. Park would see to that. Yi-ho was dismissed. The power struggle was over, decided not by violence, but by the impending success or failure of a medical procedure happening 23 floors below him. Amani did not sleep. The bone pain was intense, a deep rhythmic ache that matched her heartbeat. She thought of the man upstairs waiting for her cells. She thought of the police outside her door. She thought of her mother across the ocean. She was no one's asset and no one's victim. She was a woman walking into a hospital room to give a part of herself away, changing two worlds forever. The sun would rise on the day of the donation, and nothing would be the same. The collection room at Seoul National University Hospital was sterile and silent, save for the whir of the apheresis machine. For 5 hours, Amani Akoi's blood cycled out of one arm, through a filter that captured the stem cells and back into the other. In a room 3 floors above, those same cells, a milky, life-giving slurry in a sealed bag, were being transfused directly into Choi Min-jun's bloodstream. Two people connected by biology and circumstance were undergoing the same procedure in reverse. One giving, one receiving. The next 30 days would be a biological siege. Min-jun's immune system, deliberately destroyed by chemotherapy, was at zero. The new stem cells were invaders, meant to colonize his hollow bones and rebuild his blood. The risk of rejection, of infection, of failure was overwhelming. Amani recovered in a private room for 2 days. The deep bone pain subsided, replaced by a profound fatigue. She was discharged into a new reality. The police detail remained, but the media circus had calmed, moving on to the next scandal. She returned to her apartment. The black sedans were gone. The silence felt heavy, expectant. In the isolation ward, Min-jun fought. The first week was critical. His body was a battleground. Every fever was a crisis. Every lab result was analyzed like a stock ticker. Mr. Park maintained a vigil outside, coordinating the business through a tablet, but his focus was entirely on the numbers on the hospital monitor. The organization held its breath. Yi-ho, awaiting his fate, watched from a distance. On day 10, the first sign of hope. Min-jun's white blood cell count, which had been 0, registered a faint, almost imperceptible bump. The new stem cells were grafting. They were beginning to multiply. The doctors allowed themselves a cautious smile. By day 15, the count was climbing steadily. His body was not rejecting the donor cells. By some miracle of genetics, Amani's immune blueprint was being accepted as his own. The news was relayed to Amani by a hospital social worker. "The transplant is showing early signs of engraftment. The recipient is responding." Amani nodded, feeling a complex wave of relief, satisfaction, and a strange, hollow sadness. She had done it. She had saved him. The weight of that knowledge was its own kind of burden. 1 month post-transplant, Min-jun was strong enough to leave the isolation ward. He was moved to a private recovery suite, his immune system still fragile but rebuilding. His first order was not about business. He asked Mr. Park to arrange a meeting, not with Amani directly, that would violate every ethical and practical boundary, but through the proper channels. He wanted to express his thanks and to discuss the promise he had made. Amani received a formal letter delivered by a hospital administrator. It was an invitation to meet with the Choi family's legal representative to discuss the gratitude gift and her future arrangements. It was couched in sterile, legal language, but the meaning was clear. It was time to discuss her payment. She agreed. The meeting was held in a neutral conference room at a prestigious law firm. Mr. Park was there along with 2 lawyers. Amani brought a volunteer advocate from a migrant workers NGO. On the table was a single sheet of paper. It outlined a trust fund, established in her name in Lagos, Nigeria. The amount was staggering. It was enough to buy her family a home, to fund her sister's educations 10 times over, to set her up for life. There were no strings attached, the lawyer explained. It was a gift of gratitude. The only condition was a standard confidentiality agreement. Amani listened, then pushed the paper back. "I don't want it." The room went still. Mr. Park leaned forward. "Ms. Okoye, this is not. It is simply a thank you. There are no obligations." "I know," she said, "but if I take this money, it turns what I did into a transaction." "It was not a transaction. It was a choice. I made it for my own reasons. Your money makes it about you." "What do you want then?" Mr. Park asked, genuinely perplexed. "I want my job back, at the cleaning company, but with a proper contract and a visa that isn't tied to them. I want to stay in Korea, but on my own terms. I want to go to school. I want to study nursing." It was the last thing they expected. She wasn't rejecting their world out of morality. She was carving a new path through it, using the leverage she had earned. Mr. Park exchanged a look with the lawyers. This was more complicated than writing a check, but it was also, in its way, more binding. They agreed. The legal team would handle her immigration status. The cleaning company, still beholden to the Choys, would provide a managerial trainee position with flexible hours for school. The trust fund, they insisted, would remain open, available if she ever changed her mind. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Park handed her a small, sealed envelope. From him, to be read privately. Alone in her apartment later, Amani opened it. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality stationery. The handwriting was precise, sharp. "Ms. Okoye asterisk. A man in my position accumulates debts of fear, of money, of obligation. I have never owed a debt of life. There is no currency for it. You asked for no currency. You asked for a chance. That is a harder thing to give, but I will ensure you get it. The world you are walking into will not be easy, but you have already walked through harder things. If you ever need a door opened for yourself or for another, my organization will open it. This is not a threat. It is the only kind of promise I know how to keep. It is strange to carry the blood of a stranger. It is stranger to carry the blood of a person you know. I will carry it with respect. CMJ." She folded the letter and put it away. It was not an apology. It was not redemption. It was an acknowledgement from one professional to another of a debt that could never be repaid. With Yi-ho, Min-jun was true to his word. Once his recovery was certain, Yi-ho was summoned. He was given a one-way ticket to Manila and a warning. The assets he had accumulated were forfeit, left to stabilize the organization. He left Korea that night, a prince exiled, his ambition evaporated. The message to the rest of the syndicate was clear. Loyalty to the boss's survival was the only loyalty that mattered. The internal fractures began to heal, solidified by the sheer force of Min-jun's renewed authority. Amani's life began its new shape. She enrolled in Korean language classes by day and worked at the cleaning company's head office in the afternoons. Her visa was changed to a skilled worker permit. The police detail faded away. The silence around her became normal, unthreatening silence. She thought of Min-jun rarely, though sometimes. When she passed the Gangnam Tower, she would look up at the top floors and wonder. The surprising detail emerged a year later, during a routine follow-up with the transplant registry. Amani had agreed to periodic check-ins for research purposes. The coordinator, reviewing her file, made an offhand comment. "You know, your case is still studied." The match was so unusual. The geneticists found a rare marker cluster they'd only seen in a handful of people from the Cross River region of Nigeria. It's why the match was so strong with Mr. Choi. Amani was puzzled, but he is Korean. The coordinator nodded. Yes, which is why they did more digging into his ancestry at his request. The tests revealed a very small but distinct genetic signature from the same region. a legacy perhaps from a merchant or traveler on the Silk Road centuries ago that entered his lineage. It's a fossil in his DNA. That's what the match found. You weren't just a random stranger. You were a distant genetic cousin, separated by continents and centuries. The revelation changed nothing and everything. It meant her act of saving a stranger was, in the deepest biological sense, an act of saving a fragment of her own far-flung family. The connection was no longer just symbolic. It was written in the oldest code there was. 2 years after the donation, Amani passed her nursing assistant exams. She got a job at a community clinic in Itaewon, serving the migrant population she once belonged to. She worked with mothers and children, with workers who had no papers and no voice. She used her hands to hold people up. Minjun, his health fully restored, never returned to his old, flashy ways. He became more reclusive, more focused on legitimizing his empire through construction and logistics. The violence did not disappear, but it became more calculated, more discreet. Mr. Park remained by his side. Sometimes the boss would ask for a report, not on business, but on a certain nursing student's progress. It was filed away, a silent interest in a life he had altered, and which had altered him irrevocably. They never met again. They didn't need to. They were permanently linked by a cellular bond, a quiet understanding, and a debt that defined them both. He had given her a chance. She had given him a future. In the end, the cleaner and the crime lord had performed the most improbable transaction of all, a mutual rescue mediated by science and sealed by the invisible hand of shared ancestry. The story that began with a desperate search in the shadows ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, steady pulse of two lives, forever changed, moving forward on parallel paths. The story of Amani and Minjun is a paradox. It is a tale about visibility and about all the ways we are taught not to see. For an empire built on observing every threat, she was part of the scenery. For a society structured on clear hierarchies, she was in the category meant to be overlooked. Yet when the most critical crisis arrived, the solution wasn't found in the boardroom or the hidden safe house. It was found in the DNA of the person who emptied the trash. The ultimate power did not belong to the man with the most control, but to the woman with the most leverage she never knew she had. This is more than a story about a medical miracle. It is a blueprint of inverted dependency. It asks an uncomfortable question: who in your world is essential but invisible? The custodian, the delivery driver, the data entry clerk. We build systems that render them background noise until the moment the system cannot function without them. Amani's power was dormant, activated only by a genetic fluke. But it exposes the fragility of any structure that relies on pretending whole groups of people don't matter. The final, quiet twist of shared ancestry is the story's deepest truth. We imagine ourselves as separate stories, but biology tells a different tale. Our blood carries ancient maps of migration and connection that defy all the modern borders and prejudices we construct. A Korean crime lord and a Nigerian cleaner were, at a cellular level, distant relatives. The match wasn't just luck, it was a reunion. It suggests that the people we are conditioned to ignore might be the very people we are, literally, connected to. Amani used her leverage not for wealth but for a chance. Minjun used his second life not for greater conquest, but for a quieter, more secure legacy. They were both changed by the transaction. She gained a future built on her own terms. He gained a perspective that no amount of intimidation could buy, the profound understanding that his survival was a gift, one he could never command. So what remains after the cameras leave and the medical files are sealed? Two people, living with a silent, cellular bond. A reminder that power is not always where it seems, and a proof that sometimes the most world-altering connections are made not through force or strategy, but through the silent, invisible code we all carry, waiting for the moment when it will be called upon to bridge the widest divides. If this story changed how you see the world around you, the people who move through it unseen, then share it. And subscribe for more documentaries that explore the hidden connections, rewriting the rules of power, life, and what it means to be human.